This is a good one. Brothers. We are getting into brothers who hate each other. Welcome to Get to the Hook. I'm your host, Eric Colley, again joined by my guest co-host, Derek Kaufman.
I'm back. You liked me so much the first time when we did Phil Collins that I decided to run it back.
Yeah.
Well,
also, Charles is still on vacation, but
also that.
also that. This is a good one. Brothers. We are getting into brothers who hate each other.
Yes.
There's so much drama. There's some
You
tragedy
really looked
in
at me
this.
when you said hate each other. You got some strong emotions you want to work out during this podcast?
No, we're all right. But you don't have any brothers, right?
I don't. I have an older sister. We certainly have our rivalries, but not behind the microphone. Neither of us can really sing.
Well, there's that. It's different with brothers. I have one older brother. Yeah, I mean, I love my brother, but I can't imagine us being in a band together.
You tell me some stories of when you have that much testosterone in the house as young kids, there's going to be some headbutting.
Yeah, and he's 5 years older than me, so it was always, I could never win those fights.
That's right.
But we were talking about this because of Oasis, who have been dominating music news for the last week or so. They are back together, brothers Liam and Noel Gallagher, who hate each other so very, very much.
In the annals of brother rivalries in the music scene, they're second to none. They really are, because they really amped it up in the public so much. So much of the 90s and the 2000s were spent just following their, barbs at each other, which got increasingly vicious.
Yeah, and a lot of the brothers we're going to look at, like over time, relationships deteriorated. They hated each other from the beginning. Noel even said once, "I liked my mom until she gave birth to Liam." So literally from birth, They have not cared for each other, but they are back together, and I would love to know how much money they were offered for this.
It must be a boatload of money, because even the announcement, so they announced on social media, and it even sounded salty in and of itself. It was like, fine, here, you guys all want this. We finally heard you. We're going to come back together. But it doesn't seem like they like each other. It's not like they mended fences. And the picture of them, they're both scowling, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, they always kind of scowl. But yeah, I don't think this is, they rediscovered they loved each other. And we'll see some of that with some of these stories. There's some happy stories.
Sure.
Some brothers who did reconnect. But
these guys are cashing in.
The stats on this so far, just over the last couple of days, they're doing 17 shows in the UK and Ireland in 2025. I think they're adding some more shows now. Over 1 million tickets sold in 10 hours.
It's
And again,
unbelievable.
remember, this is just in the UK and Ireland. Those are significantly smaller populations than the United States.
These are Taylor Swift-like numbers,
Well,
right? I mean, they
this
might
is
eclipse
very
that.
similar to, you remember when the Eras Tour went on sale and there was all the disaster with the queues on the different websites? The dynamic pricing caused ticket prices to surge and become more expensive. Remember the U.S. Congress got involved?
Yes.
The same thing is happening. Because the dynamic pricing, the UK government is now investigating what has happened, why the fans are so outraged. You cannot overestimate how popular Oasis is in the UK.
I know we're going to get into this, but have you been taken aback by just how large this story is? Because guys of a certain age, our age, we grew up with knowing that the brothers were at each other's throats, but I didn't know there was this much pent-up demand for the reunion of Oasis, that it's driven this much, because I thought it was for, guys our age. I didn't think young people cared at all, and something is driving
Not
this.
as much in this country, and I think they are maybe going to do some U.S. dates, which will do well, but they were like the second coming of the Beatles in the 90s in the UK. They were so big. People there are very excited. I want to play a little bit of an Oasis song, but it is not Wonderwall. I know that's the obvious go-to. I'm going to do another one of their hits, and I'm going to dedicate this to Liam and Noel as they embark on this endeavor to try and finish these shows. This is Don't Look Back in Anger. I always liked that song.
I gotta say, the music holds up. Look, are they the Beatles? I never thought so. I always thought that was a lot of praise heaped on them because they were British and they were in sort of a band war with Blur, which is not quite Rolling Stones Beatles, but in any event, the music to me is timeless, and they have that quality to them that doesn't sound dated to me.
It doesn't sound like
a rock
90s
band.
music. It sounds like 60s if it sounds anything. But those songs are great, and they're going to be so great to hear live with the two of them. They haven't played together since 2009.
Yes.
Because they hate each other so much.
Now, you say people are excited to hear them again. I've heard they haven't been idle in this period. So some people say that, they don't have the pipes anymore to sort of pull off these songs. I've heard some rumblings out there. I'm curious to see how they will prepare for this, because not only were they just so salty and British, they also had this cavalier, don't care attitude.
Yeah.
They should really prepare for this and deliver on these songs. I'm hoping.
They have to. It's always been tumultuous. They had a show one time. It was announced on the monitors that the show had been canceled while the audience was there because of a fight they got into backstage. And it was famously in 96, they were doing MTV Unplugged. Liam, who was the main lead singer, got laryngitis, dropped out, and then sat in the audience and heckled Noel while he was singing.
It's so perfectly Oasis.
They're so petty.
Yes.
But that's the win, too. I mean, you want to hear the songs, especially if you pay that much for these tickets. But whatever drama is going to happen, if it happens, and who knows, but that's going to be worth seeing, too.
People want to hear the sniping. Let's be honest. Like when you go to a concert, you're there to hear Taylor make a reference to Travis Kelce. You're there to hear, Billy Joel tell stories of being in New York in the 70s. And you're there to hear these two guys take pot shots at one another. And it will happen because they sort of seem like, I describe this about Alec Baldwin sometimes. He can't help himself. He has sort of rage issues. I think the Gallaghers can't help themselves.
They are who they are.
They don't like each other, and it will bubble to the surface at some point during these shows. I think that's what's driving these.
But we'll see if they can hold it together.
Yeah.
So here's some possible examples for them. Some of these worked out, some didn't. Some legendary feuds with brothers and bands. And something interesting, a couple interesting things as I was doing this. One, sister bands don't seem to have this problem. Not to the same degree at all. I was thinking Ann and Nancy Wilson from Heart, they have endured for decades. Alana, Danielle, and S.D. Hyam from the group Hyam.
Yeah.
They are fine. No problems there. The Chicks, two sisters in that group. Wilson Phillips, Kim and Kelly Deal from the Breeders.
I think the Cores were sisters, too,
yeah,
those violin players.
Any issues those bands might have had, some of them did go on hiatus for a while. It was never because the sisters hated each other.
Yeah.
The girls are fine. Guys, maybe it is the testosterone.
I think it's the testosterone. It's the ego. It's the sort of one-upsmanship. Because you're right. I was racking my brain. We talked about this beforehand. Are there really sisters that have warred to the extent of Oasis? Not really.
No.
Pointer Sisters?
And
they had some drug issues and things like that.
One of the Pointer Sisters left. The other three stayed together. Only one is left now. Sadly, the others died. But they were fine.
Yeah.
And I also talk about ego. It's not just testosterone. I also realized in almost every one of the examples I've got, one of the brothers is the lead singer.
Mm-hmm.
Because then I looked at other bands that have brothers in them who were fine. Eddie and Alex Van Halen were the only two constant members of Van Halen. Yeah. Whatever the battles with David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar, those two were okay.
Yeah.
Angus and Malcolm Young, Tim, Andrew, and John Ferris of NXS. They were originally called the Ferris Brothers.
Right.
None of them were the lead singer. Rob and Dean DeLeo from Stone Temple Pilots. They were the main songwriters, the guitar and bass player. Ward with Scott Weiland all the time. He left sometimes came back before he died. Those two were always okay because none of them were the lead singer.
There might be a sense that the lead singer can really steal the shine of a band. I remember David Lee Roth, you mentioned in Van Halen. Eddie was a musical genius, and everyone sort of knew it when you were listening to him. He made his guitar sound different than anything you'd ever heard before. And yet it was the peacocking around on stage of David Lee Roth that really was the magic of Van Halen. And you could see that he seethed in the background. Eddie Van Halen seethed that David Lee Roth, this hammy singer who wasn't like the best singer in the world. He just had an incredible stage presence.
What a front man.
And he didn't love that. Yes, he was an incredible
The two of them
frontman.
battled. And that's probably even tougher for David Lee Roth because now you're not only battling with Eddie in the band, his brother is always going to side with him.
That's right. You got strength in numbers.
Half the band is against him already.
And look at the name of the band. It's our band.
Yeah.
It's Van Halen.
And then Sammy Hagar is a very different person than David Lee Roth, but also wound up feuding with Eddie Van Halen.
You start to think
egos.
Eddie might be the problem.
Maybe. R.I.P. Eddie. But let's go back. We're going to go way back because this is as old as music, of course. I'm throwing it back to the 1930s here.
Oh, boy.
But this is interesting. Jimmy and Tommy Dorsey. They were a trombonist and a clarinetist saxophonist, had their own big band, and they started in 1928.
You don't see many of those anymore.
Not too much.
Too many big band instruments.
But they started the Dorsey Brothers Orchestra in 1928, and they were pretty big, but they broke up in 1935 because Jimmy and Tommy hated each other. And the battle that did it for them, they got into an argument over tempo. You know the movie Whiplash with J.K. Simmons and Miles Teller?
Whiplash.
You know the scene where he kept saying, "Not my tempo, not my tempo," and then it gets violent? That's basically what happened with these clarinetist trombone players in the 1930s.
Incredible.
One of them, Tommy, stormed off stage, started his own orchestra. They split, and they both became very, very successful big band leaders. They also have two very significant contributions to music beyond their own success. The first, I'm going to play a sample. This was the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra in 1940. This song is called "I'll Never Smile Again." First thing that's interesting about this is the very first Billboard chart they ever published was in 1940, and this was the very first #1 song on it. The other significant thing is who sang it, because band leaders, it's like DJs now. Like David Guetta doesn't sing, So the vocalist on this is very significant. Listen to "I'll Never Smile Again."
I know I will never start to smile again.
got some trivia up your sleeve.
Yeah, that voice, the singer for the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra was a kid named Frank Sinatra.
I thought it sounded familiar. What a voice on that kid.
That is Frank Sinatra, who sang on the very first #1 hit in a Billboard chart.
Even as early as then, the voice is pure velvet. You can say what you want about Frank Sinatra, but the man could sing.
So, yeah, Tommy introduces the world to Frank Sinatra, which is no mean feat. In 45, a decade after they split up, they got back together for a one-off reunion. Then again in 47, because their mother was sad. And this will actually come up again. This specific instance gets referenced in another story here, but the Dorsey brothers are like, you know what? Mom wants us to patch this up. In 1950, Jimmy dissolved his orchestra, joined Tommy's band permanently. They were fine from then on out. Then in the early days of TV, they had a show called Stage Show. And in 1956, Stage Show is where Elvis Presley made his national TV debut.
So they launched Presley and Sinatra?
Yep.
That's the trivia question of all trivia questions.
Yeah.
I love that.
But this one, I mean, it's sad because they died shortly after, but the happy ending of this is Tommy died in 1956. Jimmy died the following year. But in that year, while Jimmy was still touring, he used to have Tommy's trombone on stage just by itself as a tribute to his brother.
Oh, that's kind of nice.
So sort of a happy
like during
ending.
Passover, we leave the empty seat for Elijah. He left the empty trombone.
The empty trombone for Tommy Dorsey.
I like that. That's kind of a happy ending. And the parental part you brought up, there's nothing sadder for a parent than to see siblings fight. So it's nice that they were able to bring it together for mom.
Well, there's going to be another pair of siblings who were specifically inspired by the Dorsey brothers to try and patch it up for their mother. I won't tell you who yet, and I won't tell you if it worked or not. Because first, we got to deal with the Everly brothers.
Oh, how do you pass on the Everly?
One of the most successful duos of all time. They were the most successful until eventually Hall & Oates passed them up. Phil and Don Everly, there is something about brothers when they can harmonize. There's no sound like that. I mean, listen to it. This is All I Have to Do Is Dream.
Whenever I want you, all I have to do is dream.
They're some of the founders of like rock and roll. A lot of people point to the Everly brothers
in the
as
mid to late
inventing
50s. They were cranking out #1 hits, and they introduced that harmony. And it was almost not a folk sound, but it added an element that a lot of loud, noisy, messy rock and roll didn't have.
Yes.
They were huge through the 50s into the 60s. They soldiered on into the early 70s, despising each other. Their relationship broke down. Did not help that they also both had amphetamine addictions.
That won't help,
and alcohol issues.
Uppers and ego and testosterone. Deadly
and it boiled over, and this is also going to be a recurring theme we're going to see a lot. On stage, a lot of them, on stage is when they have the breaking point. In 1973, they were performing at Knott's Berry Farm, of all places.
That's a theme park in Southern California, if you guys are wondering.
Yeah, so they're on the stage at Knott's Berry Farm, 1973. They're past the peak of their popularity, but they are still the Everly brothers.
It's like performing at a county fair, kind of.
A little bit better.
Maybe a little better.
But so Don got drunk on tequila right before they go on stage, and he's trying to sing Kathy's Clown, another one of their iconic songs, and he's messing up the lyrics because he's so drunk. Phil becomes furious and smashes his guitar and walks off the stage. Don finishes the song, and he just goes, "The Everly brothers died 10 years ago." They did not see each other for the next decade, except for once in 1975 at their father's funeral.
Oh, wow.
They both showed up for that, but they did not mend fences.
Yeah, that's a nasty way to end things. But they were so successful, I don't think people often think of them as warring brothers, but it's a sad part of their legacy. Yeah.
This one also has a bit of a happy ending. 10 years later, mid-'80s, one person helped them get back together, Paul McCartney.
Oh, nice.
Paul McCartney was a fan of the Everly brothers. Phil and Don decided, you know what? It's been 10 years. Our dad has died. Let's get over this. So they talked to Paul McCartney, who gives them a new song. It's a song called On the Wings of a Nightingale, and it got to number 50 in 1984, long after you think of the Everly brothers as being around. They also sang backup on Paul Simon's Graceland album, the song, so won some Grammys there.
They were living legends, right?
They were.
And it takes a person like Paul McCartney to be like, you guys, the sound of the Everly brothers was your two voices. I don't know what's causing this squabble, but you can't really do the Everly brothers without both brothers.
You need
it's
both.
Essential to the
you need
sound.
Both. And Phil died in 2014. They had been pretty much okay at that point, and Don died a few years ago. But when Phil died, Don said, "Our love was and will always be deeper than any earthly differences we might have had."
Oh, well, that's nice.
Again, that's sweet, but
that's a nice sentiment.
But they wasted 10 years.
You wonder if Noel and Liam could give each other a send-off.
It's already been 30 years for Noel and Liam. Think about that.
It's hard to imagine them eulogizing each other in such a sweet way, though.
Yeah, goodbye wanker.
Yeah.
Might be what they would say. Yeah. Creedence Clearwater Revival, one of the most influential, iconic bands of the late 60s and early 70s, cranking out hits. Brothers John and
never
Tom
number one
Fogerty.
hits. As
no,
you know.
They had 5 number 2 hits and never got to number 1. It is a record. Nobody has ever touched that. To have that many number 2s and never get to number 1.
Close.
That's so annoying. But I don't think that's what they were really worried about, because John and Tom also hated each other. Tom Fogerty was also a singer and a songwriter, a guitar player. But the thing was, his younger brother John was just more talented.
Yes.
Just objectively, he was. All of Creedence's huge hits, John Fogerty was the driving force. He wrote them.
It's John Fogerty's
sang them.
band.
It's
Yeah.
his band.
Yes.
Tom did not like that.
Sure.
So in 1971, he leaves the band. The other two members, who they were not related to, also started to resent John, and that's why CCR fell apart.
Was John the older brother or younger brother?
Younger.
Oh,
So imagine
that's especially
You're the older
galling.
brother,
Yeah.
and then your younger brother comes in and just it basically takes over. It becomes his band. So Tom goes solo, did some solo stuff. Obviously, it was never as big as CCR, and not even as big as John's solo career. And this one's actually more sad. This is talking about the Dorsey brothers again. John Fogerty said in his autobiography that he wanted to reconcile with Tom because he was inspired by the Dorsey brothers to do it for their mother.
Oh, nice.
He's like, it's been 10 years now, and eventually their mom died. They did not reconcile, so she missed out on that. Then Tom sued John. It was literally John Fogerty versus Tom Fogerty, or Tom Fogerty versus John Fogerty on the lawsuit. Like, they were...
You know what's interesting? When there's a massive disparity in talent, it doesn't always sour like that. Because I'm thinking of two big examples in my head. I'm thinking of the Bee Gees, where it's very clear that that's Barry Gibb is most of the talent, although Morris...
But that did
and
break them
Robin-
up for a little bit.
It did.
Robin quit in the early 70s for a few years because he resented Barry becoming the star.
That's true.
And then they were like, you know what? We're stronger together. They came back, and that's when the disco era happened.
And there's so much love between... the Bee Gees are a very tragic story in a lot of ways, because I think Barry's the only one left.
Yeah. Andy died.
But the other
Morris.
massive talent disparity is the Jackson 5, right? And that is the young little Michael coming out on stage, and it was so clear from its inception that he was a different level of talent. Not to say that Jermaine and Tito didn't have talents, because they all did. They all sounded very, very good. But did they kind of accept it more, do you think? Or was there sort of infighting, or did Joe just say, listen, know your role and get back there and do your little moves for Michael, because I know who's our breadwinner?
I think Jermaine had some issue with it, and Jermaine did leave the band. But there's a different reason for that. The Jackson 5 obviously were signed to Motown.
Mm-hmm.
They decided they wanted to leave Motown and move on to another label in the mid-'70s. Jermaine was married to Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown. He was married to Berry Gordy's daughter. How are you going to leave your father-in-law's label?
Yeah, that can be good and
So,
bad.
yeah. So the others were like, well, we're leaving. And so they replaced Jermaine. That's when they became the Jacksons instead of the Jackson 5. And it was a little contentious there for a little bit, but they eventually worked it out, and eventually they all came back together.
Jermaine's probably the
Jacksons.
number 2 talent of the Jacksons, right? In terms
Of the brothers.
Of the brothers. Oh, yeah. If you add Janet in there,
Yeah.
she's
And
she's
Jermaine
comfortably
had
ahead.
some hits on his own. Like,
Yeah.
he was a successful solo artist too, but he wasn't Michael. And I think they all realized, yeah, that's Michael Jackson.
Yeah, I also think maybe when there's a group dynamic, the Bee Gees had more than 2 people. The Jackson 5 obviously had a lot of Jacksons. Maybe it's a little easier than just saying, I'm behind my baby brother in Creedence. You know, like, John Fogerty was so good, but it must have been a hell of a thing for Tom to accept that this guy was just like running the band.
Yeah.
And he's the older brother.
He did. And this one gets pretty sad. So Tom Fogerty in the 80s had back surgery, and during a blood transfusion got HIV.
Oh, jeez.
And then he had tuberculosis and the complications of the tuberculosis, and it developed into AIDS. He died in 1990 in his 40s. John apparently had to be talked into visiting his brother on his deathbed.
Oh, wow.
And it was bitter. And they kind of reconciled a little bit towards the end, but not really.
John's a massive talent, but not known as the nicest guy out there necessarily, just like an
Maybe.
incredibly talented guy.
But his brother was suing him.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
there's no love lost
but in
there.
his autobiography, John eventually wrote years after Tom's death, he just said, I'm not angry anymore. I love my brother. It's resolved. And somehow Tom knows it's right wherever he is. So that's him trying to make his peace with it.
Yeah,
and
sure.
he said he wanted to, resolve it while their mother was still alive. And just they couldn't get on the same page ever.
I wonder if they got on the same page, they would have had that number 1 hit. They might have just like synced up just
Maybe.
perfectly, and
Maybe.
maybe they were held behind by this rancor in some way. Who knows?
Possibly. I don't know if the Rancor also made the song so good.
That's true.
You can feel the
A
tension
lot of
in
times.
those songs.
That's a good point. Strife makes magic sometimes.
It
you
does.
want to hear Fleetwood Mac. They hated each other at times,
It was
and
gold.
out of it came gold.
Yeah, platinum, really.
Yeah.
While we're talking about mothers really quickly, have you ever heard of a group called the Jesus and Mary Chain?
I have. I don't know any of their songs, but I've heard of
They
them.
were a Scottish alt-rock group in the 80s and early 90s. William and Jim Reed were the 2 leaders of that group, and again, hated each other. In 1998, they were on tour in LA and got into a fight on stage ended the concert after 15 minutes
Jeez.
because they walked off and it's like, I hate you, I can't work with you. Well, of course, the audience is furious.
Yeah.
It's 15 minutes. And their tour manager considered calling their mother in the UK to tell them to calm down.
Desperate.
It's basically like, you two figure it out or I'm calling your mom.
Yeah, we've got an audience full of people. Get your ass on stage.
Or I'm calling your mother.
I love that.
Yeah. You got to threaten that.
You got to do it. Listen, because so many of these disputes play out on stage. You would think it's all in the rehearsals and that they're all professionals. They show up to the concert and they might grit their teeth and just perform. But, obviously Oasis very famously bickered on stage. This is another example. I think it's because the emotions are running so high to amp yourself up for a performance that sometimes those turn very negative.
And you got all that energy and all those emotions going while you're on stage. And sometimes it's just like, no, I can't stand you and I can't do this anymore. I can't fake my way through this. Probably the closest thing to Oasis for like the British groups is the Kinks.
Yes.
As far as the brothers, Ray and Dave Davis. And it is not Davies, it is Davis. That's
Although everyone says Davies. I was guilty of that as well.
Yeah, I always thought it was Davies because it's spelled Davies, but it is Davis. Ray is the front man, the lead singer. The two of them hate each other. And Dave said one time, but this is how they sort of managed to keep it together for as long as they did. Dave said, nothing good ever happened without a fight of some kind.
Yeah.
And one time the drummer even got so mad, he almost killed Dave throwing a pedal at him and almost hit him in the head.
They're a true band, though. I will say Ray Davis is known as the front man of the Kinks, and he's certainly maybe the biggest name out of them. But I think of the Kinks as truly a sound, right? I mean, that everyone is contributing to the Kinks songs, and they're one of those bands that I think is quite underrated at some point.
Dave helped introduce distortion. We talked about this on a previous episode where the Kinks, with "You Really Got Me," that's those power chords. It's definitely not a metal song. I'm not saying that, but it introduced the ideas of the sounds that distorted, heavy power chord guitar sound would redefine music.
Oh yeah,
that's Dave. That's not Ray.
That is Dave Davies. Yeah,
but yeah,
Davis.
Davis. Yeah, Dave also said, and this I think is a lot of it too, because think about if you have a sibling that you fight with when you're kids. You grow up and have your own lives, and you move on, and then you love each other. You see each other a couple times a year, maybe, or however often. Dave said, we found ourselves at a very young age being in each other's faces, and we had to work with it somehow. Imagine you have this brother that gets on your nerves when you're kids, and then you're adolescents in a band, and then you're in your 20s, and then you're in your 30s, and your 40s. You're always around each other.
That's right.
Think of bands that tour a lot, and the Kinks did tour a lot. You're on the road 200-300 days a year.
Yeah, you don't have time to heal the wounds. You are constantly around each other. You're on tour buses, which is pretty close quarters to be around people that you're not. And look, siblings are just annoying. Let's be honest. You have them, I have them. When you're around someone,
and sometimes
all your
we
life,
are the annoying ones.
That's right. And it is just, it's close quarters, breeds contempt sometimes.
Yeah.
It also breeds deep love. You can also have fights with your siblings that you can't have with friends. And sometimes you say things that can't really take back, you
can push buttons that nobody else would know to push.
No one
because
knows
they know
those
all those deep-seated child insecurities and things. Well, they were there for that.
You know who's like maintains remarkably like wholesome is sort of like the Hanson and the Jonas Brothers. Why haven't they split up for just animosity reasons?
Maybe upbringing, also different kinds of music. Like I said, we've seen a lot of these bands are rock bands, and I try to think of that too. Like I looked at R&B groups, the Brothers Johnson, who did Strawberry Letter 23 and I'll Be Good to You. The Isley Brothers, there was a lawsuit last year in their 80s before Rudolph died, but the Isley Brothers held together for decades.
Yeah. The
Jackson 5, like we said, mostly held it together. Jodeci, remember 90s R&B group Jodeci?
Yes.
I love Jodeci.
Yes.
That's two brothers. Mr. Dalvin and Devontae Swing were two of the brothers, and of course Casey and JoJo were brothers.
Yes.
And when they left Jodeci, they left together as a duo, as Casey and JoJo. And they there were substance abuse issues that derailed Jodeci, but
it's beautiful. They all knew they contributed to that sound. Like Jodeci had a particular sound. Casey and JoJo, wow, that's the soundtrack to my high school prom right there.
The year you graduated.
Yeah, absolutely.
All My Life.
All My Life was a banger.
Yeah, so these rock bands, I don't know why it is they just cannot keep it together sometimes, maybe because it's the kind of music, the more...
Yeah, there's some drug-fueled, I think drugs often sort of make things worse. And in a rock context where it's a lifestyle at a certain point and you're on a lot of drugs, you're on the road a lot, you're exhausted, there's women constantly, there's going to be some friction.
And especially like these 60s and 70s bands where a lot of these are, there was a lot going on behind the scenes.
A lot going on.
Maybe too much.
Lot, yeah.
But, these guys...
But it's hard to think of, like, Hanson really partying really hard. They're out there with their parents. And sometimes when you have, like, good parents, they can maintain the peace. Joe Jackson of the Jackson 5, ruled with an iron
Right.
fist, but that also, I'm sure,
And
helped maintain the peace.
maybe it helps with like Hanson and the Jonas Brothers, maybe being three brothers.
Yes.
Because then there's always going to be that shifting dynamic. Although there's one band that's not true for. We're going to get to them in a minute. But yeah, maybe it's like
Kevin can be the peacemaker
you can
between
shift
Joe
who's
and
mad
Nick.
at who and who takes whose side or whatever. And it's like, yeah, you've got maybe somebody to broker the peace.
I like to think that Joe and Nick are like, let's just keep doing it for Kevin because Kevin's not going to be able to go solo, so let's keep the
crap
band
on
together.
Kevin Jonas, he's very talented.
Very talented guy.
Let's jump to the '90s. Black Crowes. Remember the Black Crowes?
Yes.
Yeah.
One of Charles's favorite bands, by the way. So
Yeah. Too bad he missed this
Too bad
one.
he
But
missed
you
this
know, Black Crowes. I'm going to play a little bit of the song. Maybe this song's title. Maybe this was part of the problems between Rich and Chris Robinson. This is "Jealous Again."
thought you might play Hard to Handle.
I know
Also
it's the
could
obvious
fit.
one.
Yeah.
It's the obvious. I don't want to always play the obvious one. I'm not going to play Wonderwall. I'm not going to play Hard to Handle or She Talks to Angels. Yes, the Black Crowes actually released a new album in March of this year called Happiness Bastards. It was their first new album since 2009
Wow.
because Chris and Rich battled. They actually broke up twice. From the early 90s when they had that huge success with their first few albums, they were together until 2002 and then just couldn't.
Now is Rich a guitarist and Chris
Is the lead singer.
There you
Yep,
go. It's
as
that
always,
dynamic again.
Always. So they break up in 2002, got back together a few years later, toured again, broke up again in 2015. So like, nope, we cannot do this. And I love, Rich said that one of the rules he and Chris had through all of their battles, and this is such a brother thing, we can't hit each other in the face.
Yeah.
Just
We can take it only so far, but then we
no
just have to
cuts
walk
and black
away.
eyes on stage. Like, come on. In 2015, he said the problem was that Chris had this proposal about the ownership of the band. And then you got familial dynamics, then you bring business into it, the creative push and pull of who's writing and all that. It just broke them apart again.
And they were very big. It's hard to walk away from a lot of money, and then, one person thinks I'm more the reason we're making so much money. I think that's what happened with Oasis. They were so massive. They probably should have broken up before they did, frankly, because they were having such nasty spats
Well, I forget
on
which
stage.
one of them said about the other. He's like, if we hadn't been brothers, I would have sacked him in 1996.
Yeah, it'd have been over. Like these
Yeah.
guys hated and detested each other, but they were massive and the money was rolling in and they were just at the peak of their game and they just stayed together maybe too long. Kind of like a marriage that stays together too long.
But you're still family. You can divorce somebody and you're not related anymore.
That's right.
They are still brothers no matter what. And this one, the Black Crowes one, this was, I thought, particularly kind of sad. They didn't speak to each other for 7 years. And Chris never even met Rich's two youngest children.
That's the tragedy, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is now you're talking about cousins who can't have relationships with each
They
other
don't
because
know each
the
other.
brothers
Well,
just
he
hate each
never
other.
met his nephews or nieces. And
Yeah.
they are good now, though. They are back together. Like I said, new album. And the interesting way how they came back together, like, we said some of the other ones, they wanted to do it for their mom or like, we need to heal our brotherly relationship. They missed each other creatively. Because Chris and Rich both had a mutual friend that they worked with, but they weren't working together. They just had a friend who was friends with both of them. And the friend told each of them that each of them had said they missed writing with the other one.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so Rich told his friend, I miss writing with Chris. Chris tells the friend, I miss writing with Rich. The friend tells both of them this, and it's like, what are you guys doing?
You know what that's like? That's kind of beautiful. That's like the Pina Colada song. Where they both realize they both like getting caught in the rain and
Yeah.
they're both not into yoga and they're into
Yeah,
champagne and they have to
exactly.
learn that by going away from each other and coming back at
I
the end.
love that you worked the Pina Colada song into that. This was Rich's recent quote about their reunion, this current reunion that produced a new album and a new tour. He said, we want to focus and do it right for ourselves as human beings, for ourselves as brothers, for ourselves as writing and creative partners, as well as the other reasons. So this one, I think, hopefully it sticks this time.
I hope so. They make good music. I mean, Charles loves their music. I like
love
it
the
quite
Black
a
Crowes,
bit.
yeah.
Yeah, it's very good.
All right. I said earlier that usually when you have three brothers, it doesn't get as dramatic unless you're the Kings of Leon.
Yeah.
You remember the Kings of Leon?
I
This was
remember
their
them
big
very
breakthrough
well.
song. This is Sex on Fire.
I don't like much modern rock and roll, but I did like Kings of Leon. I
Yeah.
thought they had a cool sound.
Yeah, I like that song a lot. So the Kings of Leon, it has Caleb, Nathan, and Jared Followill, three brothers. Caleb is the lead singer. Oh, things got bad between them. In 2011, while they were fighting, Caleb walked off stage again, just stormed off, and the fans were obviously upset. And Jared says to the audience, hate Caleb, not us. Throwing his brother under the
Direct
bus.
all your hatred
Yeah.
towards him. Yeah.
He sucks, not us, and he's not mom's favorite. In 2007, before they really blew up, Nathan dislocated Caleb's shoulder in a physical altercation. and took a knife and stabbed his bed and like ripped it apart.
This is a brother fight. You can relate to this.
Oh, my
You've had
brother
physical
gashed me across the
confrontation.
head one
Yeah.
time with a watch, and I grabbed some speakers and hit him in the side of the
Yeah,
head.
we
with
you
them.
got to carry some scars from your sibling fight.
There literally are some scars for me and my brother. We're good now, though.
Yeah, everything's good.
We're good.
You're gonna start a band soon.
Yeah, no. We both play drums. I don't know what kind of band that would be. He's a much better drummer than I am. But
Really, you're a hell of a drummer.
No,
Though.
I am not. But
Oh,
he's really,
Eric is
really
being
good.
modest. Eric was in a rock band with other TMZ people for a
Yeah.
time. I went to go see them at shows at Cantor's.
That's right.
Come
We
on,
did
you
play
guys
Tanner's,
shredded.
Where Guns N' Roses got their start.
That's
It worked
right.
out a little differently for Guns N' Roses, but yeah, they did a documentary called Talahina Sky, and in the documentary, Nathan's on audio telling Caleb, "Your band cannot stand you."
Nice.
They hated him. But so 2011, they go on hiatus. They didn't officially break up, but they needed a break from each other. Then and they got back together in 2016. They were working on a new album called Walls, and Caleb said, "We're in the best place we've ever been. A lot of bands don't make it this long, especially family bands." And he's right about that. And then that album, Walls, was their only #1 album. So they got back to a good place,
I love that.
worked it out, and they've been touring ever since.
Look, when it's like trial by fire. You come out stronger when you've survived
Yeah.
this kind of like intra-family squabbling. Sometimes you're really ready to like take on the world.
Well,
again.
that
So
happened to
that's
the
great.
Bee Gees,
Happened to the
and
Bee Gees
and
as
to the
well.
Jonas Brothers after they split up for a while. I don't know how much they hated each other or anything, but they went off and did their own thing and came back and released "Sucker" was a
Yeah.
#1 hit. So
That was because Kevin was like, "Come on, guys."
stop hating on Kevin Jonas.
Kevin's
Man,
like,
you were
"Please."
such a hater.
You know he's the oldest one, by the way. I
Yeah, of
didn't know
course.
that. To me, he seems like the baby brother, but he's actually the elder statesman of the band.
Yeah,
he
and
just
he
seems
is-
like the baby brother.
He's
because,
happy to be in a band with Nick and Joe, and
Yeah, I bet he rules behind the scenes.
maybe,
Anyway,
maybe. But yeah, so Liam, Noel, figure it out.
I'm excited for it. I have cautious optimism that they'll be able to like recapture the magic. But even if not, I'm gonna want to see the.
Yeah,
fights.
either way, either they keep it together and this is an amazing tour, and they come to the U.S. and it'll be great to see it, or it just implodes and they just take petty shots at each other, and that's also going to be amusing.
Social media is gonna be fire when those
Yeah.
concerts happen.
Yes, it is.
Everyone get out your iPhones.
Yeah. All right, that is going to do it for this week. I think Charles is back next week.
I
He
don't
might
know.
just be on permanent vacation now. I don't know.
Tune in. It could be me all over again. Thanks,
Oh,
guys.
nope, Charles, come back. All right, we'll see you next week.